Welcome to the Mystic and the Skeptic. I'm your host, David Daniel Gonzalez. In this week's show, our guest is Perry Phillips, the host of the Itty Bitty Podcast, a new show on Buzzsprout, the hosting site for our show, as well as YouTube. Our topic is drugs, illegal and legal. Although it might come across a debate, I want everyone to know that I will be kind to our guests and pose my concerns as questions. And we have done a couple of shows on this topic in the past, from the mushroom and the cross to the roots of the hippie movement, as well as a whole show on ayahuasca. However, since this is featured on a very progressive station, I try not to pontificate about my objections against psychedelics or other substances. But I do struggle with this subject due to my experiences at the commune that I attempted to be part of. There, the whole culture revolved around marijuana and psychedelics. To be honest, I must share that about my lack of experience in partaking of these chemicals, but it was available, and my issue, like, there was a lot of issues why I didn't even give it a chance. And then I'm always worried about the effects of it. So I don't want to be too dramatic, but I saw people just struggling in a lot of different ways. And I've worked in mental health facilities where I've seen people addicted to all kinds of different things, or as well as using drugs or alcohol as a form of coping or self-medication. So that's why I always worry when people say that the whole life revolves around drugs. Is like, why? Like, why can't they find another way to address their struggles? And again, I don't want to come off as judgmental, but I was very sad when I heard one of Joe Rogan's show where he kept on saying that the drugs that he's into are the most amazing things, and now there's all these studies and this and that. And a lot of the stuff that I hear just sounds so out there that even though they're showing that some of the drugs are able to deal with PTSD and other diseases, the more that I was around it, I found out that there's ways to synthesize the medicine and separate the hallucinogenic aspects from the others. So when it comes down to that, I'm open to that. But there's people that say, well, just as it is, just take it and you'll be fine and everything's cool. And I think it's a way more complex issue that people want to make it. So tell us more about your show, Perry, and why, like, the way that we got connected is there's this Facebook group where you find, you connect different podcasts and different guests. So you mentioned that one of the focus of your show has to do with psychedelics. Tell us about your show and why is that a topic that you guys deal with?
Thank you for having me on. The Itty Bitty Podcast is a show that it's going to deal with topics that I find interesting. So it's going to be things that I know in my life and things that are true to what I enjoy. So I like comic books. I'm basically like a big little kid, you know. I like comic books. I like movies. I like music. I like sports. And so psychedelics is one of the things that I enjoy. Let me start by saying I'm not somebody who, you know, I'm not just constantly taking psychedelics left and right. It's not something that, you know, I am doing every day, every other day. I am a big cannabis user, so I smoke cannabis actively, you know, pretty much every day for years now. It's something that I'm active about. I can smoke and then go and do a workout or take the dog for a walk or get work done. It's something that it's always kind of been a part of me. It's not something that I use as an escape necessarily. We can talk, I guess, more about that later on. I'm just going to kind of start by saying I'm not an expert or anything in any of these topics. I've been using psychedelics probably annually for a few years now, probably going back to my teens. I'm in my 30s now, and I really do think that it leads to, you know, a healthier mental health lifestyle. I don't think if you abuse it, I don't think anybody should abuse it. I don't think you should try it if you've already had issues with mental health. I don't think it's something that you should probably do. I think it is something that should be guided, and I think we should move towards decriminalization and legalization as a means to have a way for people to have a safer trip. I think if you have the right facilities to do it, then you're going to have you're going to have people that are going to be able to use it as a medicine and to help them.
Having had a show about herbalism, we know that all the medicine that we use comes from plants and from what's natural. So for people that are completely against drugs, they're not being fair, because every drug that we take, the legal ones, come from a different, like a version of it, like has been created in a lab to bring about the healing effects. So when people bring it up as a religious thing or as a naturalistic thing, that, things are out there for a reason to help us cope or deal with our struggles or stuff like that, there is a sense of, I'll give you guys that. But then you have people who are just fanatics about drugs. And I want to make this kind of like a light show, because it can be a very heavy subject. Here in Houston, where we record the show, we have the Drug Truth Network on KPFT. And this guy, man, he like attacks anybody that doesn't agree with him. And now he's finally saying that he has done too many drugs and that there is some negative effects. But there's some people that you meet and they're like, no, you don't understand. Like, marijuana is the cure of all illnesses or stuff like that. And that's where the commune that I lived at started with. They started with marijuana is good, alcohol is bad. And it's like, usually people say, well, you can have a drink, you can have a roach, whatever, a cigarette of marijuana. And it's like, yeah, but like, how much does it affect you and how much? And it's just strange. Like, I come from a different culture. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. And over there, you talked in your show about mushrooms, about how there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of myths about drugs. So we were told as kids, stay away from that stuff. Anybody that goes into that is a screw up and they're going to ruin their lives. So we came with a lot of fears. But then here, it was so casual. Like, when you start meeting other kids in high school, and like everybody's smoking, and if you don't smoke, you're not cool. And it's like, but like, why? Like, and then it also seems like a first world problem. Like, people have disposable income that they can go spend in this substance. And it's like, well, why not like meditate or do sports or something like that? Like, what is the original attraction to these type of things? Because people then say, well, it's a gateway drug or whatever. But for you, like, so society wise, why do you think that they're so prominent in this culture? And why, like you said, it helps you achieve your goals and helps you do more things, but like, why is that even available, or why is it needed?
Well, here's the thing. When I'm talking about cannabis and mushrooms and stuff like that, I'm talking about saying that it works for me, and I'm just talking about my own personal experience. And so for me, it's a chance to kind of look at your everybody thinks that it's about escapism. It's about, you're running from your problems. I think I said on the podcast, it's almost like a vacation from yourself, but it's a vacation with yourself. And I feel like it is that way because you're kind of stripped away from who you are. And I say that, I'm not trying to, sound like a hippie or anything like that, but I'm kind of saying, like, you kind of think more deeply about the things that matter. So you start to prioritize your life a little bit easier. So for me, it's almost like a way to kind of face my problems and look at them and think about them critically while having a good time, because you're going to laugh. A lot of times when you're taking psychedelics and you're with the right people, you're going to laugh until you cry. You're going to laugh more than crying. And then you're going to stop. You're going to forget what you were just laughing about. And then you're going to be on to the next thing. You're going to look at stuff really deeply and intensely. And so I think for me, it's a nice way to kind of reset. It's not a drug that you can abuse. It's, when I was I've done some dumb shit on drugs and on alcohol. And as I've gotten older, I've learned how to kind of rein it in. I don't drink as much as I used to. And there's a reason for that. It's because I do stupid things. And so now I stick more to like psychedelics and smoking herb. And so for me, it's a nice alternative to, there's no calories. There's no real negative effects on your body or your brain as far as what we can tell so far from research. research. I mean, I know there's not a lot of research that's been done as of right now. From what I've seen, it doesn't really do too much. And from my own experience, it's not something that I feel like. I usually am more conscious about drinking water when I'm on it. I'm thinking more about what I'm doing. So it's kind of like a safer way for me to have a good time. And it's something that I might do maybe twice a year, if that. It's not something that's like, oh, it's the weekend, we're busting out the mushrooms. It's something that's a big deal when we do it.
So you're in Washington State?
Yes.
And is marijuana legal over there?
Marijuana is legal, yes.
Okay. Because, we're crossing state lines. The show plays in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm in Houston, and in Texas and Tennessee is still illegal. And one of the founders of the commune that I lived at for 2 years in Tennessee, he tried to pass a law in the state to make it legal for them as a religious herb. And I know you guys were talking about that in your show about mushrooms. So I can differentiate between people that do it for religious purposes and people that do it for recreational purposes. And again, I come from a lot of stereotypes. It's almost like the Half-Baked movie or Towley from South Park, where you always meet some guy and he's like, hey, you want to get stoned? And they're always like spaced out and can't rely on them. There he is. And so there's stereotype about all kinds of different people, and I don't want to go there, but there is this component, like the cultural component of the drug being very accessible, and there's certain culture connected to it. But then I have a friend who's a Rastafarian, and he does it for meditation during his services. And I can respect that because, as far as I know, marijuana came from the Hindu religion, and it was brought to the Caribbean by people from India, and then it was incorporated into the Rastafarian religion. So it has like a certain protocol to it. It's not something that you just like grab and go for it, and then that you are irresponsible with it. Like, I've seen people drive around stoned and with their car full of smoke, and it's like, come on, that's just an accident waiting to happen. So the fear from a lot of traditional people is like, once you make it legal, then it's just a free-for-all. Like, if people are not going to contain themselves. And I don't know if that happened after Prohibition or before, where people are just acting a fool when they were drunk. But is that a legitimate concern, or is that like paranoia from people that don't understand drugs?
I mean, look what happened after Prohibition went into effect. The mafia basically took control of everything and basically ran shit while the alcohol was illegal. There were speakeasies. People were still finding a way to get it. And then they legalized alcohol, and all that stuff ended. I mean, you could still argue that alcohol is is one of the more, I feel like, I would argue that it's the most dangerous of any drug that you can take. If you want to talk about a gateway drug, alcohol was like the drug that alcohol was usually what I was drinking when I would try other substances. And so, I mean, I'm not one of those people who's against alcohol. I know that there's definitely know your limits, and if you don't know your limits, then you probably shouldn't drink. And that's why I'm one of the people that I don't necessarily drink all that much. If anything, I drink maybe once a month, if that. It's usually a special occasion, doing something, for fun. But yeah. So as far as being a legitimate concern, I think that legalization, it's financially makes the most sense for most. If you look at most of the places that have legalized, I live in a place that when I first moved, I saw legalization firsthand. So I came from California. I lived in Southern California, had my medical marijuana card. It was kind of a joke as to how I got it. So I could tell you that story if you want to hear it real quick. But so I had my medical card there, moved to Washington, and we moved pretty much right at the point of legalization. So the first recreational shops were rolling in, and we kind of saw it at the beginning where prices were really high. They were still booming. They were making a lot of money. They made so much money that within a couple years, they're on pretty much every block, which I think is a little unnecessary. For the town that I live in, there just is such thing as too many weed shops. I'm not one of those people that thinks that there should be a weed shop on every corner. I think as long as there's a couple in town to service people's needs, you should have the option to purchase it. This is America. I think you should have the freedom to purchase marijuana. If you have the freedom to buy beer, you should be able to buy
But it goes back to why do we need it to begin with? Russell Brand has talked about his addiction problems, the comedian from England. And when he went before Parliament over there, he said that people who are drug addicts need to be treated as not people who society has forgotten about, but people that have like an existential crisis or even a spiritual one, and that they have to be given the opportunity to find other resources and other ways to deal with their problems. So to me, that like hits at the heart of the issue. It's like, I understand that people need something to take the edge off, something to help them with their anxiety, to have a good time. But when does it cross the line between there's an underlying problem that is not being dealt with, and the only way that people think they can deal with it is through self-medication, that is experimenting with your body? Like in the show that you guys had, we're talking about blacking out and things like that. And like only, in my eyes, I know, again, I don't want to come off as judgmental. It's almost like a suicidal thing to take ingest a bunch of stuff and not know where you're going to end up at. And then you hope that the person next to you is watching. And like, what if they like take advantage of you or leave you in a ditch? Like, it seems like a very risky thing. Like, what are the benefits as compared to trying other ways to deal with everyday struggles?
Well, I think that, not every single person is an addict. I think that, I have friends that I've lost to opioid addiction, and I've known people my same age that have died from opioid addiction. And so I know the dangers of addiction, and I've had my uncle passed away from alcoholism. So it's one of those things that I understand the dangers of drugs and alcohol, but I also understand the importance of balance. And so, everything in moderation. And when I'm telling stories about, blacking out, it's when I was 18 to 21 years old. And when I think back about, blacking out as an adult, it's scary because you don't know where you're at. And if you don't have good friends, luckily I always had good friends around me, but you don't always have good friends, and you don't necessarily know, what you're doing. That's another reason why I think that a push for, guided trips or guided, whatever you want to call them, if you have them with somebody who's an expert, who's going to make sure that you're not going to take too high of a dose. And I'm talking strictly psychedelics, MDMA, LSD, that type of stuff. As far as heroin and all that stuff, that's a conversation that I'm not ready to answer. I don't know how you fix that problem. It's such a deep problem that stems from, the pharmaceutical industry to heroin to now with fentanyl. And so I don't know how you solve that problem. I'm talking strictly, psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, and MDMA. I've never tried DMT, so I don't know much about that.
But again, if we take a naturalistic approach and we say, your body has the chemicals in it that it needs, and if your body is acting up, you have a disbalance of those chemicals. So you go to a doctor and you ask for extra whatever, hormone or some type of chemical that helps your brain balance. That would be your shaman. The doctor is the one who supposedly, I know there's a lot of corrupt doctors and doctors like Michael Jackson's doctor, they were just popping pills everywhere, right, and stuff like that. But let's say that is the society's modern day shamans are the doctors, and they are supposed to help you navigate life and address your disbalances. Why take it upon yourself to experiment different types of things in the hope of what? Like, what's the ultimate goal?
You're saying, like, why change your state of mind?
Yeah, like the first question that I got when we try to move to the commune is like, do you take mind expanding drugs. And it was a interesting way to phrase it, because if you come from the philosophy that it expands your mind, or it takes you to another realm, or you can talk to the aliens or the spirits or whatever, then I can see why someone would do it. But if you take it from a scientific approach, then you're trying to rebalance your chemicals, or you're trying to take yourself out of sadness, or take yourself out of a depressive state and use this to help you heal from it. Then you mentioned that you have a shaman or a pharmacologist who helps you do it. Why not use the people who are already are mitigating that? Those are the doctors.
Well, I think if you're going to be guiding a trip, you would need to have experienced the psychedelic in question. I don't think that if you are not somebody who knows how, the ins and outs of what happens during a trip, you shouldn't, be in charge of somebody who's, necessarily might be tripping for the first time if you've never tripped yourself, because you don't really know what to look for. You don't even know what to expect. You don't know what, you kind of know what they're going through if you've done it before. And again, it's not the same for everybody. A lot of times people take it and you feel great immediately, and it's a good feeling from beginning to end. But for me, the reason that I do it is that it's not like out of sadness or boredom or anything like that. It's just occasionally I feel the need to take them, and then I feel lighter almost afterwards. It's not like a feeling like, oh, if I don't take them, I'm like Jones and I need them. It's just if I find them, which it's one of those things that they'll pop up randomly. It's not something I seek out. It just will pop up, and somebody that I know will get them. I always get them from a reputable source, and I don't ask any questions. And then I just get a few of them to get, and then I do that once or twice a year. And so it's not, it's not something. Experience? What's that?
It's almost like a bonding experience. Like you do it as part of your crew.
It's honestly, it's one of those things that I can't really explain. I would probably I do them by myself occasionally. It's one of those things that you learn a little, you allow yourself to, learn a little bit about what you need to do going forward. I always use it as a productive thing. I never go into it like, man, I just need to escape all my problems. And I'm also not one of those people that think that, you shouldn't go into it with baggage. I think that everybody should, everybody's different. If you think you can handle it and you think that that's what you need and you think that you should try it, you should try it. If you don't think it's for you, I don't think that you should have to be forced to try it out. I think that if there's a way for people to do it safely, though, I'm all for it. I don't think that, I know we're a little ways away from that. I know there's a few places that just decriminalized, so it's kind of a step forward. But, it's one of those things that, for me, it's every time it's a different experience, and it's almost like it's like a retreat, and you can kind of reset, and then you're good to go for another however many months. And it's not like if I didn't do it, I just wouldn't, I don't have any issues with depression, anxiety, anything like that. I get up, I work out every day. I just recently lost about 50 pounds, and I've kept it off for almost 2 years. And so I get up, I work out, I walk the dog every day. I get all my exercise done. I work on my stuff, and I go about my day. And I smoke cannabis throughout, and it doesn't really affect me.
And not to make light of people's experiences, but one time I have a friend who's Mexican American or a recent immigrant like me, and we were talking about gangsters and a gangster lifestyle. And I know in your podcast you mentioned that you like African American gangster music. And just between you and me, Perry, how much of it, when you start as a young person, experimenting stuff like that, how much of it is it to just get girls and to have a good time, and how much of it is actually because that's what we were saying about gangster stuff, is like for us, it seemed really strange. Like, why be a gangster? But you realize that the women are attracted to like tough guys. So the same thing with drugs. Like some women are attracted to people who deal or who smoke, or they want to smoke with them, or it has like a sexual component to it. Is that even there, or is that something that we're making up?
No. For me, I mean, at this point, I'm 31 years old. I've listened to all different types of music. One of the podcasts that I do is called Choice Nugs Only. I just started doing a weekly Spotify playlist that I'm going to update that goes along with it each week on Mondays and Fridays. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be doing on a weekly basis. So I'm big into music in general. But for me, hip hop is my favorite music because if you find good hip hop, they're usually telling a story. And so for me, that's the most important part of music, is if I can vibe and I can listen to your story and I can connect with you on that level, then I'm going to continue to listen to the music that you're putting out. But I don't listen to a lot of the mumble rappers or a lot of the new shit. I find new shit that comes out, but I try to find new shit that I like, that I really like and that I mess with, and I put that on the playlist. So.
But is it a subculture of being rebellious, of being?
I mean, I guess that's a little bit of it. I guess that's a little part of it. I've always been antagonistic. I guess I've not antagonistic, but at jobs and things like that, I've stood up for people if I thought that there was something going on that maybe shouldn't have been going on, or if there was somebody that was being treated unfairly, and they weren't going to say anything. I would stand up for people and kind of talk for the group a lot of the times. And so it would get me in trouble more times than not. And so for me, podcasting was a way to, branch out on my own and talk to the people that I want to talk to and have the conversations that I want to have.
And so the push for legalization comes with like a social movement as well. Like when you think about incarceration, when you think about people feeling threatened by the police, one of the big issues in the commune, and they're going to kill me for bringing up all this stuff, but I'm not there and didn't work out. But it was some people, their whole life revolved around smoking weed. So being in the commune was like a safe space for them to be at. And then they had like this kind of paranoia that the police was always after them. And you can see in rural Tennessee the police actually messing with people they know that do drugs just to give them a hard time. So have you met people who are like their whole life revolves around smoking or doing drugs, and that they make choices like they go work for Whole Foods so they know they're not going to be tested. They go live in like rural areas so then they can do whatever they want. They can grow stuff and not get caught. Have you met people like that who are like obsessed with that? Because to me, just like the gentleman who talks about mushrooms, it's like it looks bad. Like if you like, I didn't like Elon Musk smoking with Joe Rogan at his show because it made it kind of flippant. But then on the other hand, you have people like, he's a successful guy who smokes pot. You have people who like their life is kind of in shambles because they smoke pot, and that's the only thing they care about. Like, do you come across people like that, and is there a way to get them out of that type of obsession?
I mean, I've seen people like that with everything. I mean, you've got video games now with esports popping up. I mean, you could argue that people that are training for esports are doing something way too much. You could argue that eating too many potato chips is bad. If doing too much of anything is going to be bad. I've said before that I'm a smoker. I smoke on a daily basis, but I'm not somebody who sits, and I'm not like, fucking Cypress Hill or Snoop Dogg where I'm just chiefing blunts all day. I'll do a dab in the morning, do my workout, make breakfast, walk the dog, do all that stuff, get myself going, and then throughout the day, if I feel like it's not like a blunt session after blunt session after blunt session. And, you know, since you were talking about the hippie commune, there's once a year I go to like a hippie festival and kind of unwind. And when you go there, you see both sides of it. So you see people, I mean, that whole weekend, people are barely wearing clothes. Most people are half naked. You know what it looks like. You've lived on a hippie commune. It's basically people are having a good time. They want to be free and chill out under the stars and not really have anybody tell them what to do or when to get up, and they want to party. And you see both sides of it. You see people that don't party at all and they just kind of are there hanging out. You know, they're there for the camping aspect. They're hanging out, chilling. There's people there that go hog wild and they're doing all types of different drugs and they're getting fucked up and they're running amok. And some people there, that's their life every day outside of that festival. Some people there, they go there and they wear a suit and tie other days. You know, the past couple of years I've been there, I was in a suit and tie on the rest of the week. And then I went there and I was, you know, in my underwear the whole time. So it's one of those things where anything in moderation is, as long as you can get a handle on it. I mean, it's the same thing with alcohol, the same thing with all that stuff. It's just if you take too much of anything, it's eventually, you know, going to lead you down a place that you're not supposed to be. And so I see it happen all the time. But for me, I'm not one of those people. It's just I stay motivated even though I'm smoking. I smoke and stay motivated.
Well,
Hustle and motivate, as Nipsey Hussle would say.
Well, you hear that people, react differently. So you have some artists, and when they do drugs, they become more creative, and then you have people who get into a depressive state, or they start having really bad hallucinations. So, but the biggest concern that I had was the exposure to children. And I know that it sounds very overprotective and stuff, but, you know, when you have a 13-year-old kid smoking a bong and driving a golf cart around, like it just seems, again, like recipe for disaster, because their brains are not developed. They're getting into stuff that might hold them back academically or mentally. And then once you get into that, how do you get out? Like, I always made this analogy, like, if you're like a goody two shoes kind of guy who's like military and super like hardcore about that, you can always take a step back. You can always go party and relax and do something that is a little more free and free spirited. But if you're just a free spirited person all the time, how are you going to be able to hold a job? How are you going to be able to survive in society? Because society is not the hippie camp. Like, society is very tough. So if you can find a happy medium, like you say in your experience, that's wonderful. But when it becomes this kind of like fomenting, almost like this, you know, there's carefree and there's carelessness, and that's where I was worried. It's like I already I'm afraid of my kids getting into drugs too early, and now it's like it's being invited, like it's being given a green light. And then I'm the bad guy because I'm saying, hey, let's take it easy. Let's think about it. Maybe wait until you're older to get into that. Now it's like the opposite. So I'm all about freedom. I'm all about people doing whatever they want. But then there's this social aspect of encouraging people to do stuff and not really caring if it's going to affect them positive or negative. The other thing, like now is coming up that there's articles and information about people having really bad experiences with marijuana. And you have to have that debate. If you make it legal, everything needs to come to the forefront. But like one of my friends was saying that before it became legal, no one would ever talk about the bad trips with marijuana because it would make the movement look bad. Now that it's legal, now you can actually talk about how it does affect some people very negative.
No, I mean, I'm the first one to say, I don't think that kids should be given weed. I started smoking weed fairly early. And it was just because that was the crew that I ran with as a teenager. And so, kids' brains aren't developing until they're like, 22, 23, something like that. So I agree 100% with that. I don't think that kids should be smoking weed. I think if once it's legal and, they're getting it, am I going to be mad if they're getting it legally? No. Am I going to lose my shit if they get it illegally? I can't be too mad because I did the same thing. But I think that you can't just ban it and get rid of it and say that, it's dangerous because some people abuse it. I mean, yeah, you can say that about pretty much anything. And as far as it goes with MDMA and stuff like that, we haven't really talked much about that. I know they use MDMA. They're talking about using that as, treatment for soldiers coming back from war with PTSD. So I think that there's definitely some benefits medically as well to, mushrooms and LSD and MDMA.
Well, and that's what we had on the show, and I was very non-confrontational with my friend because one of the founders of the show is someone who experiments with a lot of different substances, and his brother has PTSD from being in Iraq. So they took a trip all the way to South America and they did an ayahuasca experience. And being from Latin America, I just can't even fathom or understand going through all that. I know that when you have a major trauma or something, you're willing to do anything to address it, but there's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many people who could take advantage of you. There's so many things that could happen. You pass out and your body ends up with no organs. There's so many fears that I would have to even consider that. And I guess Americans are more brave or they're more naive. I don't know. It's really hard to wrap my mind over this thing of accessibility and even willingness to partake of all these things. I just keep on comparing it with why can you do yoga? Why can you do other things that give you the same type of high? I always joke with people I'm high on love, I'm high on happiness or whatever. It seems like a completely different world. And the more I talk to you, it kind of seems like that. It's we're not going to agree that people can have the same type of experience without it, or that you need it, or that you want it, or that people have the freedom for it. But it goes back to society. What is society willing to put up with? So my biggest issue with libertarians is that I really think they don't care about anybody but themselves. So they'll say, you want to smoke yourself to death? Knock yourself out. You want to do drugs? Whatever. I don't care. And then on the other side, you have people who are trying to control, like conservatives. They're trying to tell you what to do. And I don't know if there's a happy medium because what's the moderation for something that is addictive or that's something that can be harmful? I guess it's on the individual, but then it's also on the person that gave it to you. And in South Park, they make fun of now people are going to be fighting for organic marijuana. And I guess you can have organic LSD or organic something else. So now it's only the super privileged can take the really good stuff, and all the poor people are going to take the stuff that is mixed with other stuff that could kill you. So it just seems like an unnecessary risk to go through all that for something that you might be able to achieve on your own without this foreign element that you have to pay for and you have to take risk on. So am I crazy to bring all this stuff up?
I mean, I think part of the fun part of life is taking risks. I think a lot of the dumbest things that I've done have been the most fun. When I went to Costa Rica for my honeymoon, we did pretty much everything they said you shouldn't do. I mean, we were smart about it for the most part, but we, got a guide from the beach. He turned, we ended up using him every single day. He ended up being really nice. We ended up buying him a bottle of Johnny Walker because that was his favorite bottle. But he was super cool, took us all over, got us a nice spot to hang out on, to finish the day at the sunset. And then the last day called our hotel room to make sure that we had a great time all week. So we ended up, could he have murdered us? We went off into the jungle with this guy. Could he have murdered us? Yeah. But we also had a really great experience with somebody from another country that we might not have had otherwise if we had just stayed on the resort with all the people that, there was a guy there. We sat down and we're at the table, we're playing blackjack, and it's not for money or anything. It's for like keychains and shit. And this guy sits down and the dealer says, hola. And the guy goes, I don't speak that language. And we're in Costa Rica, mind you. So I just look at him. I'm like, well, you're in the wrong country if you're not going to, at least try to speak the language. Like you're at a resort. So the resort was filled with people like that. I would have been stuck with people like that rather than met this guy, who drove us past the school where his kids go, took us to get empanadas, and, we ended up having a really good time. We didn't get murdered or anything like that. But yeah, we could have gotten, something bad could have happened, but life is about taking those risks and having a good time. And as far as I wanted to touch real quick, because before I forget, I did say on that podcast as well, for me, I know in my own personal experience with mushrooms, I used them almost as a way to quit smoking cigarettes. And a lot of people think that's crazy, or they think that that's nuts. But I remember the exact moment that I was sitting by a fire. I had, had the cigarette in my hand, and I was, looking at it, and it was half smoked, and I had the thought, like, you don't really need this. It was at that exact moment that I knew I was going to quit, and I quit pretty much within the next month, and I was done with cigarettes. So that was one of my experience with that as well. I was able to quit smoking cigarettes cold turkey. I'd tried before. I'd tried, with the dip. I've tried all the different solutions, and vaping, nothing. And this time I tried with the mushrooms, and it just, I don't know if I willed it into existence or what, but that's kind of my story about it.
And I'm glad I listened to your podcast about mushrooms, because I was going to blast you regarding smoking.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a smoker since he was 15, and he died last year from having all his arteries clogged up from the nicotine or whatever it does. It made him have a weak heart. And then there was a guy that I knew who he had some lung problems, and then from smoking marijuana and cigarettes, and then he went on to do alcohol instead. So there's people that in my eyes are doing destructive things, or choose to do destructive things because whatever, they have emptiness or whatever. And so to me, like, if you can vape marijuana or ingest it or something like that, anything but smoking. Like, I was smoking hookah, once a year, once every 6 months with my wife, just as a cool thing to do. And my daughters, who are tiny, they're like, "What the heck are you doing? Like, you're gonna die just like grandpa." So the smoking component of it, like, how do you work around that? Especially, in some cultures like Native Americans and Rastas, the smoking is part of the ritual component, but it is not, like you said, being an abuse. It's done only in very special occasions. So I just feel like there's all these things that can go wrong, and like I guess you can do that with food or anything like that. But it's just interesting that humans have looked for stuff to take them to other places or to expand their experiences. I met a Native American pastor who part of his relationship with other Native Americans is that he had to smoke peyote for them to bond with him. And you would think that as a Christian, he would have problems with doing drugs, but for him, it was a cultural thing. Like, he had to do it to be able to connect with fellow Native Americans. And then he had good trips and bad trips, but he saw it as, talking to the angels, talking to the demons. So in your podcast, you guys mentioned either having greater awareness or walking into other realms or something like that. Like, is that just hallucinogenic kind of stuff, or do you really believe that there is some type of path to other universes through drug based experiences?
I've heard that about DMT, which again, I've never tried DMT. I'm not opposed to trying it. I just haven't had the right circumstances. But as far as with like acid and psilocybin, it's definitely, I mean, it's auditory, so you get an experience through your ears as well. And so for me, I'm big into music. Like I remember one of the most fun I had. We had got mushrooms randomly. I think we had them from left over from some party or something. And I was living in California way back, and this was years ago. And it was me and two of my friends that we ended up just sitting on the stoop, and we had eaten mushrooms. And we sat on the steps, people watching, bullshitting with people who would walk by throughout the day. And we listened to music the whole time, and it was just like we were having our own little concert on the front step. And we had a great time. It was one of the best times I've ever had. And so I think that for a lot of people, life is rough for a lot of people. It's not, it's not the same for everybody. And so for a lot of people, and again, from my experience, I don't do it from a place of sadness or like I need to get away. For me, it's a way to reset and think, okay, how can I tackle this next step of my life? And like, how can I, build on becoming a better person? And I try to use it as like a way to self-evaluate myself and kind of look outside myself and kind of, see what I need to work on. But for a lot of people, that's not necessarily the case. They're stuck in a rut, and unfortunately, the thing that gives them relief from that rut is the thing that keeps them in that rut. So they kind of keep going back to the same thing. And so for them, a lot of times these drugs are a way to escape. It's a way to, to kind of, to leave, I mean, if you take a lot, yeah, you're going to be in another consciousness for sure. But if you take like a recommended amount, you know what's going on. You're aware enough for what's going on. But I don't try to take so much that I can't see straight. I try to take enough to where, I can kind of focus on what I need to for the upcoming months.
So what do you think about programs like in Holland and places like that, where they'll take someone who is doing, you guys separate between hard drugs and natural drugs, but, I kind of see a connection between both. But let's say that someone is an addict to any substance, and they'll take them in and they'll give them a different dosage or a synthetic version of the really bad stuff they were taking, and slowly weed them out of being addicted to that. And then they somehow rehabilitate them. For some reason in the U.S., they see that as a form of dependency, and you're actually providing drugs for people. That just sounds crazy. But they say that there has been positive and negative effects of doing that in other countries. So let's say you had a friend who was like obsessed with marijuana or LSD, and there was a program to kind of wean them off of it. Would you support that, or would you think of it as more like, well, that's his journey and he needs to kind of find what works for him? Or is there such a thing as a right and wrong person for these type of things? And they call it an addiction when your whole life revolves around it, and then you make poor choices to keep your intake of that happening. So is that too paternalistic to try to get someone out of some type of obsession with the thing, or there are some cases that people do need help to get out of?
I mean, they already have programs for people who are who have a problem with addiction, but the problem with addiction, I think where I come from, I don't know if you remember the show called Intervention. It was on TLC or one of those channels, and they would do a different person each episode. And so there was an episode of Intervention about Brockton, Massachusetts, and Brockton, Massachusetts is one of the the worst places for opioids. And at the time, I think it was even worse, and that's why they were doing the special on the actual city of Brockton rather than just on one person. And so they had a big problem with oxys and even Xanax, all types of different pills leading to heroin and then fentanyl. Everything's been laced with fentanyl now. So if you don't know where you're getting your shit, your stuff could be laced with fentanyl and you could be dead like, Prince or Tom Petty. And so for things like that, I think it's getting harder and harder to avoid, especially with pharmaceutical industries pushing. Sorry, I'm getting over being cold. We were just traveling. With pharmaceutical industries pushing pills left and right. If you get injured on the job or something, they prescribe you 30 Percocets, and you're not somebody who's ever taken Percocets, and all of a sudden they feel good, and you're somebody who's already drinking a 6-pack because you go to a job that you're unsatisfied with. I've been on both sides of being in a place where I was broke, I was running around acting a fool, to a place now where I'm a little bit more stable. I'm in a marriage with my wife that we've been together for years now, and so she lets me do that stuff. She kind of knows that that's the thing that I like to do, and at first she wasn't big on it, but then she realized that it's something that I don't take advantage of. It's not something that I'm abusing. It's something that works for me. As far as cannabis goes, I think that there's different degrees of people who smoke cannabis. I don't see it as being something that, I know some people who have had addictions for it. Sorry. But as far as the majority of the people that I know, especially when I lived in Southern California, it was like people would be like, hey, you want to smoke and go climb this mountain? Or like, hey, you want to smoke and go play volleyball down at the beach? Or, go get a burger downtown. Like there was always something to do. Let's smoke and go to the gym. So that kind of was where I got that. It was kind of part of that culture. And so that was kind of where I started smoking throughout the day. And it's not something that, like, if I don't, like, I just was on vacation, and they have legal weed in Massachusetts where I was on vacation at, but you can't really get great stuff. So I was, smoking here and there, but I just kind of used it as a way to take a break and reset. And then when I got back, I started smoking back up again. But I try to take edibles here and there, and I use vapes for the most part. So I'm not usually smoking. I got rid of my pipe years ago. I smoked the raw joints occasionally, but yeah, I try to stick to vapes. That's a long way of answering that question. Sorry. So
what was the resolution of the intervention show? Like, how did they help people?
Well, it was like 3 different people that the show revolved around. It was so long ago that I don't even really remember how it was when they had a big problem with drugs coming up from Florida. There was pills coming up. They were writing prescriptions. I'm sure there's documentaries or something about it at some point. They had to have made them, but there was doctors writing prescription pills, phony prescription pills. I actually knew people that were getting them from doctors down there, and they would send them up 95, I think was the highway, or I think it was 95. They would send them all the way up the coast, and they would end up in Massachusetts. But yeah, it was an episode of intervention about the town of Brockton, and 3 different people in the town. So it was years ago. I don't remember. I don't think that show's even still on anymore, but you could probably find it on YouTube if you search hard enough.
So in this show, we try to dispel conspiracy theories and address issues like this one to get to another point. So when I say, if you're focused on drug legalization, or you're focused on disproving 9/11, whatever, what came out about 9/11, or you're focused on all these other things, it takes you away from like what I find is like real problems, such as poverty, abuse, lack of resources. So have you met people that, since they're so affected by their use of drugs, that they don't really have the energy or desire to get involved in anything else. Because like I feel that like one of the reasons that the progressive movement has kind of fizzled out in when you need them the most is, I don't want to blame it on drugs, but I do wonder that if you say, okay, I expect everybody to show up to this rally and we're gonna take over, and then nobody shows up because they got inebriated the night before and they forgot about it. So it always feels like half-baked where, they were going to work on something and then they started smoking. Next thing you know, they move on to the next project. Like, it seems like the progressive movement is kind of like that. It's kind of...
Well, have you ever been to, like, Hemp Fest or there's different... anytime they do big... like there's Hemp Fest. I know they do one in Boston on Boston Common where they like it's almost like an unspoken day. Even before they legalized it, it was like a day that people would go in. I think it was 420, and they would do basically it was a big movement to legalize weed, and you would go there and show up, and you would stay there the whole day, and they would have like concerts, and they would raise awareness, and then once the sun kind of went down, then that was the end of the sit-in. It wasn't like a sit-in, but they would have different stuff like that. So I think there is a movement. I think that the lazy stoner stereotype is more of a stereotype from back when back in the day when just trying to sell it as a dangerous drug, when the war on drugs was started. I think there's a lot of messed up stuff that kind of has, like, I think that the laws in the states are really messed up as far as marijuana goes. Like, I think it's pretty fucked up that it's legal now, and that they're praising, essentially praising white people for selling marijuana, and there's still people, black people and minorities serving prison sentences for marijuana from when it was illegal. So I think that our whole system has to kind of be redone. I don't think that I'm not one of those people who's like, yeah, everybody can do whatever they want. I don't typically like lean left or right, or I try to think about things objectively in terms of, what would be best for society as a whole. And I think that legalizing cannabis, and I think that starting to move towards legalizing psychedelics like LSD and mushrooms, and giving people a safe place to do it and a safe means to do it is a step in the right direction. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think certainly it's going to take a lot of convincing, to change people's minds and to change the narrative. And I think more people need to have conversations like this, even if you disagree on it, because it's just, the other thing I wanted to mention as well, talking about medicinal purposes, was I knew a DJ when I lived in Los Angeles, and he would get cluster headaches. And so he would have to take mushrooms once a month, or not once a month. He would take it like once every 6 months or so. And that would, cluster headaches, if you don't know anything about them, if you look into them, they're so bad sometimes that people often contemplate taking their own life rather than live with it as an illness, because the headaches are so bad and so constant. But he takes a little bit of mushrooms once, and for 6 months he's good. He takes another one in 6 months, and he doesn't have headaches like he does normally. And so I think that there's a lot of research that needs to be done. And again, I don't think it should be a free-for-all. Everybody starts popping pills and taking mushrooms, and I'm all for having a good time and partying, if you do it safely, and if you do it with the people that you trust, and if they legalize it, I think that's an easier way to make that happen.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show. I hope that we can do this crossover show in the future where we can use each other's programs to help boost our audience. And we have, I don't really know what audience do I have. Like, we talk about every single subject, so we might be too broad, but that's what I think needs to happen. Like, we need to be able to discuss everything critically and objectively, like you said. And so it's great to have you and your perspective. And there are some we're never going to understand each other unless we talk, like you say, unless we give each other a chance and see where people are coming from. So thank you for bringing your perspective to this program, and for having honest conversations. I think that sometimes you don't get that from like the big shows. Like, seems like, even though it seems like an open conversation, sometimes it's like too scripted, or they have an agenda trying to push. So it's good to hear good people who just want to open up their mics and have heartfelt discussions with other guests. So thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, David. Bye.
Take care. Take care. Take care. Take care.